This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Well, we come today to the 32nd chapter of Job and the introduction of a new character who we haven't met before. His name is Elihu, which means in Hebrew something like, "My God is He." I'm not sure exactly what to make of that, other than to note that Elihu, over the next several chapters, is going to at length claim that he speaks for God. Elihu, as a debater, if you will, doesn't have the sophistication of even Job's three friends, let alone Job himself. He speaks a lot, but he doesn't say much. You know people like that? Commentators argue a little bit about why these chapters and verses are here. Some suggest that Job has ceased speaking in the 31st chapter, and God will answer Job in the 38th chapter. And so this material is placed here to create a tension, to further the idea that Job waits for God to speak. Other commentators suggest that this is an insertion because the other three friends of Job argue from their own experience and tradition, and nobody has yet stepped up and taken a prophetic stand and said they speak for the Lord. And so Elihu does that, completing the number of terrible things that we can say to people in the midst of their suffering. Whatever the cause, Elihu takes the whole 32nd chapter of Job to introduce himself. He has lots of words, as I said, but he wants to inflict them on all of us. You can probably tell that Elihu is not my favorite character in this whole book. We're told in the first verse, so these three men, the three that we've been introduced to before, ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. In other words, there was no dissuading Job. Their arguments didn't move him at all from admitting that he was guilty, that he'd committed a transgression, that he was wicked and deserved what came upon him, and all of the other things that they argued. So they stopped. They recognized that their arguments were futile. Then it tells us Elihu, son of Barachel and the Buzite, of the family of Ram, and this is more than we know about any of the other people who spoke in Job. These are references to places and people in the Old Testament, so he's a good Jewish kid, became angry. Elihu became angry. He was angry at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He was angry also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, though they had declared Job to be in the wrong. So his chief motivation is that in anger he now speaks. Now there's something we should notice here. As you may recall, God has never once said that God was angry with Job. And yet now Elihu claims to be angry with Job for justifying himself. That's a judgment that Job is somehow still lying, and so it's an extension of what the friends have been saying all along. You deserve what you got, Job, own up to it. And that all Job is doing is making excuses. We do that. I do that to people sometimes. We write them off because we think they're just making excuses, when in fact, maybe they're telling the truth. I think it's fair to be angry with the three friends of Job because they have not given him any answer that has any traction, but they keep declaring that Job is wrong. It tells us that Elihu has waited so long to speak because they were all older than he is. And in a culture like the Hebrew culture of the Old Testament, elders get to speak first. Elders are respected and have esteem in the community. Unlike our culture, where new and young and happening seems to be in favor, well, Elihu doesn't speak because he's not old enough. But now that they've stopped speaking, Elihu sees his opening. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouths of these three men, he became angry, and so he answered, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid. As we're going to see, that's not really a very self-aware statement for Elihu. There's nothing timid or afraid about this guy. I said, let days speak and many years teach wisdom. But truly it is the Spirit immortal, the breath of the Almighty that makes for understanding. Elihu is there claiming something that nobody has claimed so far, that he speaks for God. It is the breath of the Almighty, the Spirit of God, that is giving me and anybody else what to say. Elihu is going to kind of set up a situation like several other places in the Old Testament where a decision is called for based on the people in the story, and that we as readers get an insight as to knowing already who's right and who's wrong. We know that Job is blameless before the Lord and that the Lord loves Job. So Elihu is like the serpent in Genesis, who comes along to the humans and says, oh, God didn't really say that you'd die if you ate of the fruit of the tree, did he? Or in 1 Kings, where all the prophets are telling Ahab that he should go and fight a battle. And one lone prophet says, no, if you fight the battle, you'll die. And the king has to decide. To give you an idea of what happens in that case, Ahab chooses to fight, and he dies. We have to figure out who's right and who's wrong in this argument, and Elihu plays the role, like the serpent and the false prophets, of setting something before us in the name of God that isn't true. This happens in our culture all the time. People claim to speak for God who don't, and we must discern. This pause that Elihu provides between Job's final words and finally the words of God in chapter 38 brings in this new perspective. He claims divine inspiration, and he does so with lots of words. He does not appeal to logic and argument from experience like the other three. So this is an added element of discussion. Sometimes when people suffer, we say, well, I have a word from the Lord. Let me share this with you, as if it will fix all the problems. But it may not. At one point during this section, Elihu says, I am full of words, and I find myself laughing, because for sure he is. And he has a spirit within him that constrains him, but it doesn't constrain him very much. Elihu is going to go on from chapter 32 through 37 with everything that he has to say. So we need to be mindful that he thinks for the Lord, and that he offers this kind of literary choice that is laid before us. Are we going to believe him as the word of the Lord? Or are we going to believe something else? It's a choice we have to make every day, and I pray that we get it right. Amen.